Hi everybody, so we'll get started in 1 second. Welcome everybody. One thing just to say, at 11 o'clock, we will observe a 2-minute silence. I'll try and set my timer on, but if it's approaching and people are talking, then one of my colleagues do remind me that it's coming up to 11 o'clock and we'll do a 2-minute silence if we're still going at that time. All right, I shall get started. So, welcome to our show and tell for the digital site notice for Camden. This is a project that Future Gov have been working very closely with Camden on, funded by the local digital fund. So we're really grateful and thankful that the local digital fund are supporting this sort of work, because it's really, really valuable to demonstrate what can be done with digital in the world of planning. So, who else? This is our team. We've been working really closely with Camden, and it's been a fantastic few weeks. We're nearly at the end of our project, and so we're showing you today where we've gotten to in terms of the final product. Just in case you've never been to a show and tell before, just so you know what these things are like. It's an opportunity for us to show our work as openly and transparently as possible, and we like to get feedback. So at the end of this presentation, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise where we gather your feedback, and also we're going to this opportunity to ask open questions as well. So do save those up. Or as we're going, you can also ask questions in the chat, and one of the team can respond either from Camden or from Future Gov. So what we're going to talk through, we're going to go through a bit of background to the project, tell you a little bit about our studies around sort of feasibility of bringing a kind of digital site notice into a council. We're then going to explain the prototype and then show it to you, so show you what we've built, and then some next steps. And then after that, as I said, we're going to do a bit of what's called a Menti exercise, where we ask you some questions. Those questions are specifically aimed at people who work within local authorities. So if you don't work within local authorities, then apologies, there's a bit at the end which you'll just watch and observe rather than take part. Okay, so as a reminder, in a previous phase that Future Gov worked on with Camden, we kind of explored the possibility around a digital site notice. We didn't build a product at that time. We were just exploring what might be feasible and to see like if our hypotheses around having a digital site notice were true. Following that, we planned out how Camden might take this sort of project forward. So we were really keen to be able to create a real kind of site notice that was built from Camden's open data hub. It was also really important for us that this process was then made accessible to other planning authorities. So everything that we're going to share with you today will be made open, so other organisations can use it. And a really important part of that is to create a standard set of data. It's kind of the foundation of having sort of consistent and effective digital planning tools. So what we wanted to try and create through this new piece of work was a kind of minimum data prototype. So to be able to create a working prototype using Camden's open data of a digital site notice to understand, whether or not systems would engage with this, understand how much it was possible to create a kind of useful site notice using data that we could find, wanting to make sure if we were using the right content information, and also just to see if the kind of planning terminology was relevant to people, or if people could meaningfully feedback on using that sort of data. So I'm going to hand over now, I think, to Steph, who's going to talk a bit about how we explored the feasibility of using Camden's data.
Thanks, Thomas. So one of the key things we did in the first bit of work is to engage with users around what kinds of information they might like to see in a digital site notice. And we did this through a kind of relatively simple card sorting exercise with a range of residents with kind of different levels of experience of the planning system. So people that had engaged in the planning system, but those that hadn't before. So that gave us a really nice list of kind of prioritized information. And what we then sought to do is understand how feasible is that data, or how feasible is it to access that data to incorporate it within the digital site notice. So next slide, Thomas. So hopefully there was some easy stuff, and when I say easy, I mean relatively easy stuff, where the data is already produced in the back office systems, or is produced within the planning portal. So that stuff was quite easy to pull straight into the site notice. Next one, Thomas. But then there were some interesting areas around kind of medium effort stuff where there is the potential to create automated calculations, or at least simple calculations that enable you to estimate the number of new jobs, the local school demand and affordable housing. And we'll touch on later, or I'll touch on in a bit, how we're approaching that. Next one, please. And then there's also areas where we can pull in general policy and information from the council. So we know that there still isn't hypothecated to a particular development, but we can provide users with insight and information about the community infrastructure levy, and potentially link them into things like neighbourhood SIL, where they can get involved in focusing that investment in their neighbourhood. Next one, please. Then finally, there's some hard stuff where actually there isn't information obviously available at the moment, but this is where we were working, or where we are working with Camden to update their local application requirements. So every council will have these. There's the base standard of information that developers have to provide, but then each council has local application requirements. And this is a really quick and easy, at least for Camden, opportunity to kind of pull in more data and pull it in a more standardized way. We'll be asking you later in some of our Menti questions about this data in particular, and how useful it might be. I think the challenge with scaling this kind of product is, do you do kind of top down, i.e. do you seek to get DL/UHC to kind of standardize application requirements at the national level, or actually do you think about having a coalition of the willing, to coin a term, that means that councils that want to adopt this product just incorporate new data within their local application requirements. So next slide, please. Yeah, so what we've done is kind of follow Camden's format for their local application requirements, and drafted with them some kind of data standards for massings, height, and so on. And if Thomas clicks on to the next one, we'll just show you a little example of what we've done. Now this fits with the format of the local application requirements. These requirements, in particular for major developments, are quite extensive, I guess, but we also think there's a good opportunity to automate elements of this by creating forms, as it were, on the Camden website that then enable the developer to submit all the information in the right data structure, which then gets pulled into the site notice. Next slide, please, Thomas. And the final set, I think, are really interesting. So just providing a bit of, I guess, kind of user research and kind of project team insight around this. When we started this project, I think we had certain assumptions around the feasibility of kind of pulling impact data from environmental impact assessments, transport impact assessments. And actually we found that to be quite challenging for a number of reasons. There aren't kind of clear metrics always, there aren't clear and consistent metrics across different impact assessments, but actually more fundamentally we got from our user research quite a skepticism about developer produced information. Now transport and environmental impact assessments, are delivered to particular set of rules, as it were, but equally we'll know, I guess, that it's quite feasible to change those calculations. So what we've thought to do is think about what are good estimates of some of the impacts that can be produced by public planners themselves. It was really interesting working with Rich and Nora and Jono and kind of looking at some of the calculations that they do when they get a major application in, and how they then do population projections, how they do calculations that estimate the number of jobs and then kind of pass that off to other people in the council. How can we kind of standardize elements of that and give appropriate context around these estimates? So how we can talk about how we're estimating the number of jobs and on what basis we're estimating it. If you pop to the next slide, Thomas. So a good example is new jobs. The Camden use the employment density guidance produced by what was the Homes and Communities Agency, but it's really feasible to pull in the data about the internal area, the use class and so on, to give an estimate of the number of jobs, but also be very transparent about this being an estimate, it not being an impact assessment, it not being a forecast, and also to show your workings, to show that in this case Camden, or the estimate, is built on the HCA kind of employment density guidance. So it's being really transparent about the estimate rather than having perhaps a spurious level of accuracy that you might get from a environmental impact assessment or transport impact assessment. And I think that's my last slide. So I'm passing over to Harriet to talk a bit more about what we learned about how data and information is processed in the back office, as it were.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Steph. So I'm just going to talk about how the back office works now. So Thomas, next slide, please. So this diagram shows what the work that's currently undertaken by planning officers to get feedback from residents so that they can make a judgment about a development. And the reason why we wanted to look into this was to understand not just the technical feasibility of how we get data out of systems onto site notices, but also to understand the kind of people processes and the work that people are currently undertaking to get that data into a good format. So it turns out that there is a huge amount of work already that goes on in the back office. So the first part is that planners receive the data from developers via the application forms that they submit via the planning portal, but often that data isn't pulled through into systems automatically as it should be, because for major developments often the files are large and they're quite complicated. And so then through the validation of an application, there is an enormous amount of work, I think days, for planners to manually clean that data. So that involves kind of going through all of the supporting documents, things like the design access statements and the before and after drawings, to check that the data that currently the system holds about development is accurate. And the reason why, some of the reasons why this is quite a long process is because often application forms are filled in by agents from the developer side and not by the technicians, and so sometimes a lot of the data isn't correct. So there's a lot of work that goes in at this stage to make sure that the data is correct, and that's manual. And then planners kind of do a bit of what we call content design. So they will rewrite a description of a development based on the key changes that are happening and anything that might be interesting or controversial to residents. So after having reviewed all of the documents, there's an attempt to summarize that information in a way that residents understand. And then once the application is validated, that information is then shared across a few channels in Camden because of the open data portal and the planning explorer that they already have. Data goes through to there. And residents can comment on those applications online. Obviously, there's the physical site notice, so data's pulled through to that, and then they'll receive a bunch of comments via emails and post. And then also there's a lot of publication through the local press. So already there's a kind of effort made to make information digestible and readable and user-friendly so that it can be shared across channels. Finally, there's the processing phase, and this is where planners have to painstakingly go through and redact all feedback that's received via email and post, and then convert, if it's a letter, it's redacting the personal information, photocopying that letter, converting it to a PDF, uploading it to Trim, and then making it public so that that goes onto Planning Explorer. And the same for emails, it's redacting personal information, converting those to PDFs, and then putting them onto the Planning Explorer. So next slide, please, Thomas. So essentially, we've got two design opportunities here. The first is around how can we help planners to process data in a structured way, which will save them time doing all of this kind of conversion of data into user-friendly descriptions, and ultimately improve the quality of information for residents across channels. So in our previous phases of research, we've got some insights around the kind of content that residents need and want. And so it's like, how can we use those insights to develop a content model? So this is like a set of instructions for planners for how to produce a good description of a site. Next slide, please, Thomas. The other design opportunity is around feedback. So how, in the long term, how can we design feedback mechanisms that help planners to compile and analyze feedback easily, so that it's not such a kind of painstaking process of converting things online and then working out how this feedback can be used. And now I'm going to hand over to Karen.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the prototype and kind of the assumptions we wanted to test for this round 2 of the prototype. Next slide, please. So I'm going to do a quick recap in terms of the content insight we got from previous phase. So the content insights were things like, first, how does this affect me? So basically people wanted to know and have a sense of how themselves or their communities would be impacted by a specific development, and what does it look like. So they wanted to have a visual idea of how that site and how the development would, like what it would mean for that space. And with that, they preferred the massings that would show that, but not the kind of massings that were trying to fancy 3D renderers that were a bit misleading. The third point here is they wanted to know the story behind the development. So they wanted to kind of see a narrative for the development and not just like numbers being thrown around. The fourth point is how can they influence the development? So they wanted to understand how they could influence the development as was happening. So what kind of feedback could they give that could be useful and used eventually? And it's things like, is the council handling this? So people didn't really care about technical information, things like environmental health and safety, because they would expect and they would trust the council to ensure specific standards. So when we talked to them about it, they were like, I wouldn't even think that this would be needed to be displayed here, because I would expect the council to be handling all of this, and I would trust the council to do it. And what do others think? So people wanted to know others' opinions and feedback. So having the sense of community, and they may have maybe more interest in, to kind of have a say or to give feedback if a development was controversial. Next slide, please. So the first assumption we wanted to test was that having a service that shows all planning applications in a clear and very simple way would mean that first, it's easier for residents to find out about developments happening near them. And it would mean also that residents and communities would be more likely to engage in planning because they would find things more easily. So we did this by showing a list of the developments ordered by proximity, so people would see what's nearest to them, again linking to the fact that people are more interested in things that are happening very close to them, but they could see an eventual impact on their daily lives. So basically we wanted to test this, having the central place where people can easily go and see the list of everything that's happening near them. If they had that kind of tool and service, if that would mean they would be more likely to engage in planning. Next one, please. So we also wanted to test more in the kind of content design related bits. if using plain English instead of very technical jargon would mean that residents can just read about what's proposed. So we have an overview of the development, and they basically can read and understand the basic story of the site and what and where the development is going to happen. And to do that, we redesigned the content to be more simple. So we wrote copy in plain English instead of using more technical language and codes that are used, they're quite straightforward for planners, but for just like regular residents don't really mean anything. So things like C3, B1, people were like, I don't really know what that's about. And so we wanted to see if residents understood the basic story about the development. Next slide. So also relating to content design, we wanted to understand if using plain English instead of technical language meant that residents can understand what a site would be used for, and they can read about the application type for a site. And also they can understand all the different kinds of applications that there are for planning permissions. And for that, again, we worked on improving content design, and we wrote the copy in simple language. And where the data is more technical, like land usage, application type, planning permissions, we wanted to really improve it to make sure that people understood it. And another thing that we wanted to test is that if we provided users the possibility of reading more about specific topics. So here we see learn more about application types, that if they wish to dive into the data a bit more, we would be able to surface that kind of next level of data to make sure that they have all the data that they need to understand. Next slide, please. So the next thing is we wanted to test if showing the impact of development in the community would mean that residents can have more visibility of how a development could impact them and the local community. And also if, as a result of having that better sense of how it would impact them, if they would be more likely to feedback on that development or engage with it. So we did that by very clearly showing the impact data related to a specific development. And so we wanted to test if they would, with that very clear user-friendly data, would have more visibility about how the community could be impacted. And also if that, does that visibility in the end would mean or not, if they would engage. So here you can see clear numbers of, new homes and affordable housing and things that from the feedback we got from people is things that they care about. Next slide, please. And also the other thing linking to the previous point is we wanted to clearly explain how impact metrics are calculated to test the assumption if that would mean residents can have visibility of how the impact metrics are calculated and more likely to trust information presented to them. So again, many times we're just like showing numbers and residents question that where the numbers coming from. Can I really trust this data? Is it just like marketing content that's just being thrown at us? So by explaining also how each bit of impact data was calculated, we wanted to test if that would mean more trust in the data being presented. Next slide, please. So then we come to the feedback part. So we wanted to test if by guiding and structuring the feedback provided by the residents, if that would mean the residents would provide more relevant feedback. So basically structuring the feedback in small bits so they could feedback in each specific aspect of that development. And also if it means residents would know better what kind of feedback they should give. So again, a bit of content design about guiding them in terms of what kind of feedback would be more useful to planners and what could actually influence the developments and not feedback that wouldn't really make a difference. Next slide, please. Again, we wanted to test if guiding and structuring the feedback provided would mean that residents will know where the feedback will go and how it will be used. And from residents, we talked to previous phase of research. They felt that when they provided feedback, they didn't really know what happened to it many of the times, or there was just like checking a box, ticking a box to say, you know, okay, now we've provided feedback, but we're not really doing anything to it, or they didn't have visibility of what happened to it. So we wanted to test if they knew that this was going, you know, somewhere and taking into account if they would be more likely to feedback on a specific development. And also if that meant the officers in the end would receive better and more nuanced feedback through that more like guidance and structure, if that would mean that the feedback was had more quality. Next slide, please.
I
think we've done that one, sorry, my fault. That one.
Okay, so this bit is about growing engagement. So I think it's a bit of the next phase we want to kind of test moving forward. But so trigger, they're using things like things that allow residents to sign up, receive updates about a specific development, and allowing residents to share development with their communities on social media and friends. If things that would mean more engagement in the future. So again, it's creating the loop that they can share the development and get feedback and kind of grow the sense of community and grow the sense that the community can have a voice, basically. Next, please. So this last bit is again about growing engagement, but basically creating the link or bringing the local plan into this a bit. And we wanted to test it if they, by like understanding what a local plan is, and the residents also can see how the engagement can have more influence on developers that they're happening around them. So basically the things that they cannot influence at this level of the kind of the planning application level, if they know a bit more, read about a bit more about the local plan, if they would be able to see that eventually they could have either like a bigger impact on things to come. And I think that's it for the prototype, and I hand it over to Lizzie now, who's going to talk about what we've built.
Thanks, Karen. Cool. So thanks, Thomas. So this was just a little bit of kind of a recap from, I think this was from the last show and tell and the data discovery that we did. So just sort of showing the journey that we've currently got, which is where the data comes in at the planning portal, and it sort of goes into this XML file. Obviously, we've talked about how there's a bit of, you know, there's some problems with that, and it doesn't always come through, and sometimes it has to be manually pulled through instead to Northgate and Trim, and we've got sort of the personal records bit as well. And what we've sort of focused on is for the actual build is the data that's available in the Open Data API. So next slide, please, Thomas. So we spent a bit of time looking at the sort of the actual designs from the prototype that we had, and creating this kind of very tiny map of, which is actually massive, but it just looks tiny here, of all the different data points that we've got in there that would need to come from somewhere, and to try and figure out which parts we could get from the Open Data API and which parts needed to come from somewhere else being obviously the CMS, which we've sort of ended up arriving at as part of this prototype build. And so you can see all the bits in blue, in the sort of light blue, are the parts that are coming from the CMS. So it's quite a lot of it that is not available currently. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, so this was the sort of the technical approach that we've arrived at for this build. So we've got two separate kind of systems. It's the CMS and the digital site notice front end, which is also being fed by the Open Data API, as well as the data from the CMS. The way we've sort of built it is it's a mono repo. It's written in modern JavaScript. So it's powered by that data from the Open Data API. And for the CMS, we opted for an open source headless CMS. So headless just means it's where the data is stored is separate from the front end. So it is a good thing for us going forwards, because it means that also actually that data is available in an API format. So it could also be used elsewhere as well, which is quite nice. Next slide, please. So the first step of the build was we started with the digital site notice. So we built this sort of very lightweight front end. It's built in Next.js, which is a nice modern framework for building web apps in JavaScript. It enabled us to build something very quickly, which was great. We used only data from the Camden's API, and we added just a very basic postcode lookup feature. So next slide, please. I think I've got some screenshots of what it looks like. I won't linger on this too long because I'm actually going to do a demo in a bit. So we'll look at all of this, but you can see what it sort of looked like to start with. So these are the screenshots from the website. So we have like a list of planning applications, and then you can see the details for individual planning applications. So it's a bit less detailed than the prototypes we had in Figma, but we're still able to create this, and we were able to build this actually very quickly, which was really cool. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this second part of the build was building the CMS. So we opted for Sanity CMS, which is open source. It was very quick to set up. So the site notices now combine data basically from the API and from the CMS. So we've got it currently, so it's still powered mainly by the API data, and the CMS data is completely optional and just enriches the digital site notices. So it's not, so there's already lots of data in there, basically lots of site notices in there, even without having to go in and edit anything. And then anything added via the CMS is extra and yeah, enriching the digital site notices. So the CMS fields are the ones we've included to start with were ones to do with the application details, so things like a name, an image, height, and the impact data fields as well. And we've tried to match these fields up as much as possible to the planning portal fields and the fields that are available in the Planning London Datahub, which also match with the planning portal fields. And that's sort of with the idea that at some point in the future, it would be possible to get to a place where that data isn't being pulled in manually, it's actually coming through automatically. So either for GLA councils like Camden, it could be coming directly from the Planning London Datahub once the patch has been applied to Northgate and that works. Or for other councils, there could be some exploration to do to try and figure out if the XML files coming from Planning Portal can be parsed and read and then pulled into the CMS as well. So there's some exciting opportunities there to explore going forwards. Next slide, please. Right, so this is what this CMS kind of looks like. So we've got the sort of back-end system where you can go and add planning applications, and well, I'll go through this in a minute. We'll see all the fields that you can add, and then the screenshot of the digital site notice on the right is how that data would then look once it's been added. Next slide, please. All right, cool. So I'm going to do the demo now.
Right. Let me see what I can do. So I think this is when I Can you share now, Lizzie?
Yes, I can. Hold on a second. Okay.
Sorry.
Can you see this? Yeah. Okay, cool. So so this is the digital site notice. You can see there's big blank spaces where the images would go. We haven't got images for these just yet. So this all is just coming through from Camden's Open Data API. I think these are ordered by last registered. So at the moment you can enter your postcode. So for example, if I put a Camden postcode in, and oh, can you not see it?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me stop sharing myself, and then hopefully people will only be able to see. There we go.
Yeah. Can you see now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. So yeah, this was the planning list, like a list of applications. So I'm going to search by postcode now. Hopefully it won't take too long, and hopefully it all works. So now it orders, so it shows you the planning applications closest to you. There's loads of them, as you can see. We're not filtering, so there's no way of filtering the Open Data API by minor or major applications currently. That data is just not in there. So we've just got everything. So some of them might not look like what you would expect to see as a site notice. And this is what they look like. So this is the sort of very basic. None of these have got any additional data added for them in the CMS. So this is just what they look like. And what we've got sort of little timeline, and this links out to the planning alerts, so Camden's planning alerts. And I can show you also, so I'll show you one that's also been filled out. So this one, just a big disclaimer here, because if any of the data in this prototype looks accurate to you, that's completely by chance. It's all going to be made up data. So just to put that out there. So yeah, this would be one that's been filled in. So it's got an image. The description is still just coming from the Open Data API, but now we've got these extra fields of how the site will be used, the height and construction time, and the impact data fields as well. Lots of impact data fields, and then the last bits are all the same. And yeah, so I can show you what this also looks like in the CMS. So this is Sanity CMS that we've set up. As you can see, there's only a couple of things in here. This is the test one that I've just been showing you. So the way it works at the moment is you basically create a new planning application. I'll show you this, like this, for example. And you add the application number. So the application number needs to match up exactly with what is in the back office system. And that's sort of how it communicates and figures out which data to show for a planning application. And you can add so a name, which will show up as the title on the planning application page. Then you can upload images, you can enter all of these fields. And then for the impact sections, they're sort of optional ones. So you can choose to add the fields about housing impact, and then you fill these in. And once you're done, you hit publish. And I can even show you, if we're going to get really, I'm going to show you what this looks like. So for example, if I just pick this application, and I just need to make sure this is as it would be written in Camden's system, so with forward slashes. And for example, we can just change the name of the development. Let's say make it a home extension. I'm just going to add some fields in here, so max 2 stories, and maybe I'll just add some open space data, for example, like 100 square meters, and it's restricted, or let's say unrestricted. And I hit publish. And it might take a little minute or two to come through. So this is the one I updated. I'm going to try refreshing a couple of times and see what happens. Yeah, it's not immediate. Hopefully it does work. There we go, we've got the title. Hooray. And then the height is there. And you can see the impact data, which just has the open space data in there. So that's it. That's how it currently looks. So we need to do a bit of testing to make sure that this all works and makes sense. The CMS fields and everything. We're going to test that with the planners to make sure that that is that it all is intuitive and works how it should. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thanks, Lizzie.
No worries.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about how we tested this with people in Camden.
So at the beginning of this phase of work, so about 2 months ago, we did some deeper investigation with residents and prioritised the content that they would want. And we were looking to understand how residents consider and make judgments about a development so that we could provide them with the relevant information to do that. So that is why we designed the prototype that we designed. And then round 2 that we did 2 weeks ago. So this was really about understanding, now that we know what data is feasible and now that we pulled it through in this way, is that enough to ensure that residents can understand what this development is and they know what it means for them in terms of the change that it's going to have on their lives. So we did that in 2 ways. We wanted to reach 2 groups for this. The first was just random members of the public in Camden, and so we did what we call guerrilla testing. So this was going out onto the streets with the prototype and stopping people and asking them, can you look at this application? Can you tell us what it means? Can you describe the change? And do you think you would use this thing? And the other thing was that we wanted to look at the kind of existing infrastructure that communities have to influence decisions. So that's via residents associations and neighbourhood forums. So we contacted some 2 neighbourhood forums about this work and asked them if they would be interested in getting involved to test this with their members, and they said yes. So what we were interested in proving in that piece of the research was whether there is a value proposition for residents associations and people that are already quite involved in the planning process, whether this service will help them to more easily communicate information about changes in the local area to their members. So I'm going to hand over to Karen to talk through the findings.
Hello again. So I'm going to talk a bit about the guerrilla testing phase. So as you can imagine, it's not very easy to just approach people on the streets, but we managed to go to Kentish Town and talk to 5 very helpful residents, ages ranging from 25 to 75 years. So quite a broad range, which was good. And also good that none of them had experience with any previous experience with the planning application process. So that was great for us to kind of show them the prototype and test if it was like straightforward to them. Next slide, please. So the general kind of insights findings we had is that they found the digital site notice prototype that we showed them very easy to use, very straightforward. The content, they found it also very straightforward and easy to understand. And we got some nice quotes that to help illustrate that. So one of them is, perhaps I'm not the best person because I'm digital phobic, but I still think this is quite navigable. So this was great as someone who is like very averse of technology and, you know, talking a lot about how difficult it is to access even with like very basic apps. And she found it like really straightforward to use. So that was good feedback. Next slide, please. So we also found out that people would engage and provide feedback if the development can closely impact them or their community, which is something we already talked about. And people will provide feedback if they know it will be taken into consideration. So the same thing about sometimes providing feedback and not really knowing what happened, sending an email and, you know, not hearing back and not really, yeah, just thinking that you did it for nothing, you had no response. Next slide, please. So again, nice quote. If I didn't like it for development, I'll give feedback. A simple yes, no feedback would be easier than just get in touch with local council and have to send an email and wait for someone to reply, or you don't know what happened with your email. Next slide, please. The last bit of insights is that some residents were unsure about the quantitative rating we did with the little faces. So we had this like feedback rating thing where you could just select the faces if you're happy, if you're angry. And some of them felt it wasn't enough to capture the thoughts on a specific development. So next slide, please. So this explained as I'm not really so great about this, not very nuanced, a bit simplistic. And the problem is that there might be aspects you love and aspects you hate about the development or dislike. So I could be happy for the open spaces, but angry about new jobs, for instance. So this wouldn't cover it. So basically saying you have multiple opinions on a development depending on which aspect is important to you, or which aspects. Next slide, please. So about the residents associations that Harry just talked about, they are quite willing to help, and they're really pleased to see that Camden is making efforts to share better information and that want to keep like residents engaged and to be more engaged. And also how the residents associations will find this very valuable in terms of helping them to reach residents and get that engagement in the planning process. I'll hand it over to Thomas now.
Yes, so just very quickly in terms of what's coming next, if you were on at the start, Nora was talking about how this project's finishing very, very soon. So we need to explore what Camden needs to do next with this. So the first thing to do is to say that this site notice needs to be tested live, both in terms of how residents interact with those digital, the digital product that Lizzie showed, but also how Camden staff use the CMS system. So there needs to be a period of measuring and learning about what works and what doesn't. We also want to explore how to support other councils to implement these data standards, and to know a bit more about how this product links to other digital planning engagement products, because through the work that lots of councils are doing, supported by DLUC, there are lots of innovations happening, and it's important to know how they connect up so that we don't have a too messy set of kind of digital products that don't speak to each other well. So that's what's coming next. And now we want to do a little bit of interaction. So those of you who are here at the last show and tell will remember this. Now, this time, these questions are all for people who work within local authorities. So apologies if you don't, but hopefully the results of this will be as interesting for you. So what you need to do is you need to get your phone or get a new window on your laptop and go to menti.com and type in the number on your screen. You can also use the QR code if you're that way inclined. If one of my colleagues can just put that code in the chat, that would be really useful, because now I now have to stop sharing and then try sharing something else. So bear with. So just screen. It shouldn't at the moment be asking you any questions. So just give me a second and I shall. Right. Okay. So the first question, which should come up on your Menti screen, is, so we're interested to know how regularly local authorities update their local application requirements, because this will tell us if there is an opportunity to bring more standard data across the sector. So we're interested in when you are planning to do that. Yeah, when are you planning to update your local application requirements?
Hi, Tom from Southwark here. Just a quick question. So you mean your validation, like in terms of validation or wider kind of data kind of requirements? I
would defer to Steph to answer that question if he's still on the line.
It's the former. So I think, yeah, the valid local application validation requirement.
Thanks.
Now this is useful. It's useful to know that it's happening quickly. That's good, because that shows there's an opportunity there for us to try and bring a bit of, like, spread some of the learning from this project. And because obviously if all applications are required to submit certain forms of data that don't currently get submitted, it helps power the site notice, particularly in some of the impact data. Great.
Yeah, Tom from Southwark, just quickly, we do it kind of on an ongoing basis.
Oh, great.
Anecdotally, it's whenever anything new comes along, we'll update it.
Oh, that's useful. Cool, thank you. Great.
How long does it take, Tom? So if you decide
it depends on obviously the requirement, and obviously if there's any kind of back office work that's needed. But usually it's just, you know, firstly update a PDF. Dare I say PDF? But update, a list.
Sometimes feels like PDFs are kind of, it's a dirty word in a project about creating some kind of digital app.
Hi, sorry, can I ask Tom, are you not checking that, getting that through members to get it approved, or other?
I think it depends on the scope, doesn't it, of the amendment. I mean, if it's a legislative amendment, for example, like say a fire safety statement or something that's come along through the adoption of the London Plan or similar, then we'll just go ahead and do it. If it becomes a bit more political or requires that level of confirmation, then we'll go and get it.
Cool, that's helpful. Thank you. It's the same for us, really.
Okay, next question is, so we're interested in whether you would consider adding these particular data to your local application requirements. I think on this one, you should be able to select more than one option. We're just interested if you would consider adding these things to your local application requirements. And maybe if you wouldn't, you could maybe share why that's the case. Maybe in the chat or.
And just a confirmation of LOD2 massing, like a 3D model or image, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so what we've toyed with here in discussion with Camden is clearly many major developments will have a rendering, but again, there was skepticism from users about the accuracy of those. LOD2, sorry, I should have explained, is level of detail 2, which is like the standardized way of expressing the massing. So it's a simple massing model, basically.
And I assume that's just an image of the massing model, Steph?
Correct, yes.
Not actually a kind of 3D environment that they can kind of navigate around.
No, so I think I think we said,
well, that would be good though.
we asked for, I forget the file type, but there is a particular file type that relates to CityGML. So it's not actually an image, it's a 3D model that could later be used in a 3D environment, but in the first instance you would just use an image of it.
Yeah, I mean, in Southwark, we use View City. We require FBX files for all major developments, so we can implement that. And obviously, we look at ways of how we can use that file in public consultation, but we're a bit limited at the moment. But yeah, sounds good.
Thanks, everyone. I'll let this slide stick here because we're nearly at 11 o'clock. Just about sort of 40 seconds or so to go. But if people can keep voting until 11, and then at 11 o'clock, I'll stop showing my screen and sort of turn the video off. But if people can keep voting, interesting. That LOD2, yeah, those are the ones that were just described have got slightly less. Seems maybe slightly more progressive, perhaps, to add that kind of data as opposed to more numerical data, which is slightly easier to add. Okay, right. I will just stop sharing my screen because we're approaching 11 o'clock. Thanks, everyone. We'll just do 2 minutes silence from now. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everybody. Right. I think I need to now start sharing my screen again. So. Yeah. So you should be able to go back onto your Mentees and we'll do the next one. Actually, just before we move on, does anyone have any reflections on the fact that the LOD2 massings have come out relatively low here? Is that because it's sort of not, it's much harder to create that data, publish that data, harder for you as planners or harder for your developers or your...
I think it depends on the scale of the application, Tom, to be quite honest, because I mean, it might work for some majors or what you would classify as maybe sort of like super majors, but certainly the smaller scale applications, it could be sort of a big financial cost for somebody to have that work done.
Yeah.
That's certainly my feeling anyway.
There may be, rather than the actual massing model itself, each applicant's likely to produce some imagery for the Townscape visual impact assessment. Which obviously usually makes it look absolutely fabulous from the angle that the applicant's chosen.
Yes.
But, however, it is still a 3D representation that might be usable. And actually, one of the things that we find when we have used massing models from, for example, ViewCity or the one that Camden uses, with that level of detail, LOD2, it's very basic and it just looks like it's plonked down. And so actually it's quite scary for residents to see, and they just think it's going to be this like a cliff face with no detailing. I know that's kind of pretty basic, but there's kind of issues around that. So there might be another option which can deliver a 3D kind of representation.
Okay, fab.
Thomas, just on that, yeah, in our research, the reason why this one came out on top as like the visual, because we compared line drawings, renderings and massings, and this one came out on top because people wanted to get a sense of like how big it was, like, and what it would from like a 3D perspective. But obviously with renderings, they were just like, no, this is just developers promo, like we're not interested in this.
It's all about where the viewpoint is for the scene. Like, you don't want it from the helicopter. Well, you might do, or do you want it down, you know, from the street or across the street next to the listed building, etc. So that you'd probably need some level of engagement to ensure that with the applicant, to ensure that you have the right one, right?
Just out of interest, Harriet, did you actually test? So I always do this example when we're talking about tall buildings in Camden, which is kind of a bit of a debate at the moment, is that if you did a block model of the Shard, it definitely would not be acceptable in any context. It's the materiality and the actual architecture of it that sells it. So it'd be worthwhile of maybe testing a couple of buildings that we know are loved and are very sort of like iconic, and then done a block model and seeing if people would have the same reaction to them, because I think there is a balance there, and it's a very good point that Tom was raising. Speaking
from Southwark, I would agree.
I think from following up from that, I think ideally we will have some like 3 standard directions, maybe from aerial view, from the street, and from somewhere else, to kind of set that out. And if it's possible to have that set for all the applicants to submit. I'm not sure if there is scope to do that, but I think probably that we can find some ways to address that to fit for everyone. But anyway, it's up for testing, so we can always change and adapt.
Cool. All right, let's go to the next question. So just on this, which do you think residents care most about? I'm just interested in it, whether this reflects what we've heard or not.
Are we choosing just one?
I'm not sure what I set. I think I set up you could only choose one, but if I didn't, that's bad of me. I can't remember what I set up now. Harriet, not to put you on the spot, but I will put you on the spot. Do you remember from the first stage user research and then from this, like which of these residents valued most in testing?
Yeah. So change in CO2 emissions was last. Yeah, height and massings were in essential information. New jobs was in nice to have, and then CO2 was like bottom of nice to have. But there were kind of there was another reason why we kind of kept CO2 emissions in there, and it's because of net zero and the kind of need for councils now to start to I guess be transparent, but also to show residents like what's happening around net zero. So that was kind of why we kept it in there, but it wasn't immediately something that people were particularly passionate about.
Interesting.
I mean, just if I may, just a quick comment on the net zero question, or actually, well, as it says here, changes in carbon emissions. You can go down a rabbit hole there around operational carbon, whole life cycle carbon, and it's kind of, yeah, you need to be, if it was kind of put forward, what actually is being presented in terms of, say, residual emissions or overall tons, or what, for example, or the financial contribution for any offsetting. So there's a kind of maybe a bit further kind of looking into that about.
Yeah, CO2 emission is a very complicated and quite abstract measurement, I think, that people just don't really understand and therefore don't prioritize.
Yeah, because using the term change, it's like, well, what are you changing from? What's your base? I mean, et cetera, and it's like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And someone may not even know what if there was, assuming it's a brownfield site in Camden, what's the existing performance of the current building that's going to be demolished, or off you go down the rabbit hole. So, but I think maybe it's kind of a question of what are the sustainability kind of features of the development, like, they're doing air source heat pumps, or they're doing like cycle parking. Again, that's more kind of easier data, maybe easier.
Cool. All right, next question. So you remember the CMS, content management system, that Lizzie showed? So you remember that the data from the current site notice sort of comes in from the API, but then in order to add some of the other features, you have to work with the content management system. So we're interested in how that would affect your workload as planners. So basically, would it add to your workload, and is that okay, or is it a problem? Like, would it replace something you already do, and would that be good or not good? Or would it have no impact really on your workload as planners? I hope that's a clear question. Interesting. This is why we need to test this with lots of different councils and lots of different planners to understand how it relates into their ways, your ways of working. Because our hypothesis is that because there is so much manual activity happening within the processing of planning data, this gives us an opportunity to kind of standardize some of that manual processing and do it in one place, but it would probably mean killing a different bit of your processes in some way.
So yeah, if, for example, the descriptions were used for the physical site notice, then that may improve kind of the information across a couple of different channels at the same time.
And also in relation to the impact measures, I mean, generally, when I receive a planning application, I'll have to have my side spreadsheet with information about the development that I pull in from what is submitted from the design access statement and sustainability statement and so on. So there's a lot that goes in the background when we make an assessment. And if this information can already be upfront provided and shared with everyone, is not a secret, it's just buried in all the documents that are submitted, I think it will really help time. So it's quite useful from our point of view, but obviously it will be helpful to hear from others.
Hi, it's Tom again from Southwark. Sorry, I know I've spoken a lot, so I do apologise. Anyone else do jump in. But this slide, this question is exactly where Southwark is at the moment about what do we use to capture that, what we call planning application metadata, the data about the planning application. Yeah. And you've presented us today with a CMS, which is, when I saw it, I was like, wow, this is exactly what we're looking at. We are literally about to go to discovery on what a CMS could be, or a database with a front end, or however you want to describe it. And in Southwark, we are at a stage where we don't successfully capture that data at present, and we need to. And I come from a planning policy monitoring position around actually monitoring we're just about to adopt our new local plan, 500 new data points. How are we going to capture that through the planning application process? So we are literally at this stage next week I've got a meeting about what could this tool look like, and you presented an example today. But what that means in terms of our planning officers is that they capture that data in their officer reports at present. And actually we need to get that out into a new place. I'm sure other LPAs have CMSs or similar setup already. Some won't at all. Some of it just rely on the very small data sets that we can capture in Uniform, which is our back office planning system. But we recognise in terms of Southwark, that's not fit for purpose anymore. Because of just the lack of data that it can hold. So I think planning officers in Southwark are going to have to get they're digital planners already. They know I keep telling them this, but there's a culture change which we need to go through about them being responsible for the data that they have with their planning applications, and that with the data that could feed into planning policy monitoring, but also into the digital site notes. And so that's kind of where we're at. But you've totally solved a problem here that we're looking at.
That's good to hear, and I think we're very aware that we think we're right that this can replace manual work happening elsewhere, but we're not sure yet how different that is from council to council, because we haven't spoken to enough. So this is all incredibly useful. Thank you. Would anyone who said that it would add to their workload and that's a problem, like anyone want to kind of talk about if on reflection they could see an aspect of an element of some of the processing of data that happens already that this could replace in some way? If not, no worries. We're just interested to see if there are other opportunities in other councils that we've not heard of or learned about. And
also, Thomas, it's like replace or add value.
Yes, indeed.
Because as Tom just said, like some of this isn't happening currently at all in the council. So yes, it would add work to do it, but is the trade-off then worth it because of the value that provides?
Yeah, absolutely. I might do, looking at time, I might just move to the next question. Oh, there's someone speaking.
Yeah, I was just to add, I mean, one of the things that I don't know if you've done this, or it might be for the next phase of the development, phase of the tools development, is kind of breaking down the role of the planning officer here, and what they need to do in presenting that. But also, you touched on a few kind of service maps in the presentation, but kind of looking at the data flow. There was one which was quite wide and quite detailed, which I couldn't really see, but it may have been included in that. But just kind of seeing, breaking that down into further detail. I'm sure you've done that already in your mapping, so sharing that would be really helpful. And then ultimately, a kind of the data schema that you kind of proposed in the CMS would be really helpful as well.
Yeah, we can share all of that, all kind of open source stuff. Did I see a hand go up actually? Yes,
Emily.
I
Emily.
did. Emily Hadley from Buckinghamshire Council, sort of been following this project for a while. Just to kind of call your question really on like what this sort of do. So really echoing sort of Tom's observation on this is this really does start to straddle the line between officer and monitoring. I feel like so that is where I could potentially see an opportunity where a lot of this is in many ways processes already covered through development monitoring, but in terms of the workload of the officer, they're usually quite separated. A lot of this would be under the current framework. A lot of manual data entry. This is data that's pulled through from evidence assessment. We'd like to be in a world where this data is already up front, and with all the projects going on, it's looking like that reality is hopefully coming forward. But for now, I think there would be kind of potential not duplication, but tasks that would be done by other members of the council. So it's more this is not necessarily something that as part of an officer's workload you'd be entering this sort of data, but it would definitely add value collecting that data and putting it somewhere. It's just whereabouts in the process that falls, and hopefully in a world of sort of automation and data dropping in and data being collected, that would be amazing. But right now, something like this I could see as being additional to already very precious officer time of making decisions.
And just to add, I suppose, to M&A, so I'm Christine Urry, Head of Planning and Development at Buckinghamshire Council. I think Emily sums up the point nicely. When it's automated, it's not a problem. But if you're requiring planning officers to do this, and I can tell you planning officers are like gold dust, to find good planning officers, there appears to be some on the call here. We have to consider what our priorities are. We don't have endless resource in local government. And at this moment in time, anything that adds any burden onto planning case officers is going to be a problem. And it simply isn't a resource there to deliver that. So my perspective is, yes, there's value to it, absolutely. But the more it can be automated, the more likely you're going to get councils to deliver it.
Christine, hi, Tom from Southwark. It's then the planning officer's job is to check it, which is what they do in the determination of the application, don't they? They're checking that there is 10 units in the floor plans, etc., etc. So totally agree about automation. If I may, just one last comment, just follow on from that, is actually, this may be for next steps as well, a list of systems/resource requirements to deliver this tool. It's something we've been looking at recently around BOPS for the expansion of BOPS and RIPA in terms of bringing new councils on. What do they need to do to actually take this? And I think maybe that's something that I'm sure you've considered that as well, of like, what is the minimum things that the council has to have in place to deliver this project? And it is an amazing project, so well done. Just to say, I have said that, it is amazing. So
thanks, Tom. Steph?
Just picking up on Chrissy and Tom's comments, I think this product, I guess, is in the middle of a kind of complex and more evolved digital planning space. So obviously there's BOPS and RIPA. Tom talking about kind of monitoring. I don't know where the Waltham Forest kind of GovTech project got to, but that was looking at automating different bits of monitoring in terms of annual monitoring report by, again, changing slightly some of the data schema at the application stage. And I think all of our DLUC friends have disappeared, he says, looking at the thing. So I would have said this if they're here or not, but like, I think there's something DLUC need to do in terms of helping the coordination around some of these initiatives. Because I think if you add them together, it does become much easier. I think I absolutely hear Chrissy in terms of the automation, and I think most of that CMS is automated. But we've built it on the Camden Open Data Store. It should be just as easy to do with not just as easy, it should be feasible to do with the planning portal XMLs. So I think thinking about that automation is important. The other thing, though, we haven't really talked about it today, is the content design. So i.e. is making the words supplied by a developer often or their agent kind of more comprehensible, which is an investment that we think is important. Obviously, it's one that's a bit of a challenge at the moment, but might a CMS kind of improve the content design skills of planners so that the information that they're handling can be more accessible to members of the public.
Just on that, I just thought I'd add that one thing that we would look to do is create some content design patterns. So I've spoken to Nora about this a little bit. For example, with the descriptions, you could have some guidance in the CMS that sort of said you always start with this piece of information, then you move on to this piece of information, and you finish with that piece of information. And that standardizes descriptions across projects, and it also takes a lot of the sort of like mental kind of load away from the people who are having to upload the descriptions, because there's a format there for them to follow every time.
Sorry, I will jump in just to say that we're very conscious about the resources and planning officers, and I myself struggle to deal with everything we have to. But I feel like this is a good chance to get all these standards that we're looking at, like what Liberty was saying about how to write a development description, and share that with developers and applicants. And ideally, these will become standards that are agreed at government level. So it's not something that all local authorities have to do in the local area requirements. So I think like it's a greater scope to get this through and automated as we wish. It's just, and that's the long-term goal. And link it with RIPA and BOPs, obviously that would just make things much easier. But yeah, is ideal scenario is there, and we are working towards it.
There's a few more hands still. There's some hands still up. No. Okay, let me just go to the next slide. I think there's one more question. Hold on. So I'm just interested here in sort of how confident you are that access, do you be able to access and use these different sorts of data in your council? In terms of using it like in this way, so accessing it via, Camden have an open API. It'd be useful to know if you are confident that you'd be able to do a similar thing in your council. And obviously those lower ones are potentially pieces of data that you don't collect currently. But I'd be interested to know if you feel confident that you might be able to in the future. And as we only have sort of 7 or 8 minutes left, while this question's going on in the background, I thought I could just open it up more generally to the group, see if we have any other questions. I mean, there's been some fantastic questions in the chat, so thank you, and we'll download all of that. But do people have any other questions or comments on what we've proposed, what we've shared, or any thoughts?
Hi, yeah, Tom Southwick, just a quick one. So rewriting the description would probably need the applicant approval, depending on what's written. And also with the council will be representing data, its own interpretation of the data and the information that the applicant submitted. So there may be, if for example you said it's going to deliver this X amounts of jobs, for example, the applicant may disagree with that figure, and so there may be pushback against that. So there may be a requirement to agree some of this data or impacts. Now there may be areas of disagreement just because of the nature of the development. So there's kind of a question to kind of look at there potentially.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I think the thing is though, Tom, with that is that you do need a standardized way of being able to calculate things like job density, so you can do a comparison from one scheme to another, specifically when you've got a follow-up application coming in, so you can kind of understand what that change is. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, we see different, there's various formulas, isn't there, to calculate job density depending on the land use, etc. So I think it's just being clear on that, isn't it, which one you're using, which kind of maybe lead on to another comment, which is around the transparency of the impact data. Like how was it calculated? Is there a requirement to show the resident how it's calculated? So maybe you could web link to a FAQ, or I don't know, or something, just so they can understand what it means. Like, for example, I think it was like 12% health impacts. I can't remember exactly what you presented, but what does that actually mean, and etc. So that's how it's calculated and what does it mean.
So just to pick up on that, Tom, we chatted quite a lot with Rich in particular about this, and the principle behind it will be two things really. One, to be completely transparent about the methodology, which is obviously, as Harriet touched on earlier, part of the challenge in terms of resident perception. So therefore linking to whatever the calculation is, if it's HCA kind of employment density guidance, just showing that. But also I think we were kind of quite clear that the route to go down is to kind of is for the councils to be quite assertive about it's our estimate, it's not the developers. And that could rather kind of square off some of those developer concerns, which is as long as you frame it appropriately, this is the council's estimate using this methodology of the jobs that might occur versus here's the impact assessment or here's the granular assessment of the jobs that developers produced. We think it can square that circle. I probably am being a bit naive, but that's again something we'd want to test with developers and say, well, if we framed it like this and said this is our estimate of jobs, would that annoy you? Would that be legally troubling in any way? But we thought that's worth a try, given how strongly given how strongly many residents were concerned about kind of developer produced data as well.
Yeah, totally.
If I could just jump in. Me again, Emily from Bucks. So first of all, goes without saying that this has been absolutely fantastic and insightful, and this is really exciting thinking about sort of the early sort of conversations on this. So really like props to everyone for like what you've shown us today. Just sort of my observations in kind of the session. I think it's really great that these sort of things are being thought of, but as we've kind of raised throughout this I think it's quite apparent that probably every authority may have their own particular set of data points that may be more either to officers, to members, to stakeholders, and to members of the public. So just speaking from a Bucks perspective, Chiltern's AONB, environment and conservation is a very sort of key thing in the sort of public agenda, and as well as things like traffic, transport, etc. So I suppose just think ahead about those data points, and appreciate all the research that's been on this. But I really would I really would encourage sort of more collaboration on what those kind of other focus points might be, what that kind of data could look like, how can that be communicated? Like for example, massing. I'm not sure if massing is something that residents in Bucks would necessarily like jump to as like what they'd like to see. But there's loads of different angles to approach this from, and obviously sort of more than happy to sort of provide any insight on that, because I think this same approach could be put forward on that, but and lots of other authorities with different kind of aspects. It'd be really interesting to explore these data opportunities from that perspective, whilst policy kind of sorts itself out, as it were. So there's lots of progress we can already start making. But yeah, again, thank you for sort of showing us and for letting us all take a look at what's been going on.
It's okay, thank you. No, I think you're absolutely right that the next phase is to like stress test this with other councils, but the way in which we built the site notice, first to say it's sort of been built fairly quickly, but it's also been built in a way which is flexible, so you could quite easily create different data points for different councils. Some of the kind of, I suppose, the more visual design, the kind of imagery around particular data points or impact points, obviously that's relevant to those particular points, but you could imagine the creation of a set of design patterns that could relate to different sorts of data, and then with the site notice built in this quite flexible way like this, you could then select different data points depending on which were most relevant for your particular area. So it does have that inbuilt flexibility. And what was particularly interesting is that in Camden, that because there is an open data portal in Camden, there's something for us to pull data from very easily. It'll be interesting for us to see if there's another similar way of pulling things from in other councils.
Yeah. The assumption that there's an open data portal for every council is challenging.
Indeed, that was not an assumption. If it came across as one, it wasn't.
No, apologies. I didn't imply that. It was more a case of we're struggling with that at the moment, and what that looks like, who funds it, where does it sit, all that kind of thing. So I'm sure it's at different stages, or not at all across LPAs.
Because we also looked at one point at actually pulling data from, I mean, this is when I get to the edge of my technical capability, so a colleague can rescue me, but we were looking at where data was coming out of the planning portal into the XML file. So we thought, well, actually, do we need to actually go to the open data portal? Are there other bits of what the planning portal and its associated products are doing that we can use? But in Camden, the priority was always to use the open data portal if possible. But there might be, when we share some of those maps of different data where data sits and how it flows, you might be able to see that there are other opportunities within that flow. It's just in Camden we have the open data portal as a different, it's a product we can use.
Let's see. I mean, I think, yeah, access to different data sources is a next step, isn't it? I mean, you could get really interesting stuff from across the dataverse.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Tom.
I just wanted to say, awesome project. It's fantastic. We look, I mean, obviously, Em and I work for working on RIP and BOPs. We welcome future collaboration. It's fantastic. I need to jump to another meeting, but I obviously welcome future conversations. And it's, yeah, so good. So congratulations to everyone.
Thanks, Tom. All right, everyone, I will let you all escape for your lunch, or a late breakfast in my case. Nice to see you all. See you soon.
Thank you all. Very helpful.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.